Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Agnes, thank you, and welcome everyone to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Tuesday. It is the 15th day of November in the year 2016. I have a little bit of difficulty saying the date of the 15th of November because the weather is still so beautiful. I think all that's going to change this weekend from what I'm getting out of the long-range forecasts. But right now, we're looking at some absolutely gorgeous weather. You know, the temperatures in the daytime, with yesterday was an exception, and I understand tomorrow is going to be an exception here as well. It's going to be either overcast and cloudy with chance of rain this evening. But right now, the sun is shining. The temperature has gone up into the 50s, and it is just an absolutely gorgeous day overhead here in southern Appalachia. I know that further south from us, there is a forest fire issue in the southern Appalachians, and I saw some of the video shots of Atlanta, and the smoke is really playing with the visibility and the quality of the air in Atlanta. So, and I'm really worried about that here because we are dry, and we really need a soaker or two in order to, because the leaves are all in the process they're about half down, 3/4 down. And it's dry leaves, and it's very, very dangerous. So, but anyway, welcome to the Virtual Center. I was just commenting before we went on the air while I was chatting with Agnes that this is the first live program we will have done since the results of the election were in. The last time we were together live was last Tuesday. It was Election Day. And at that time, none of us knew. And now I think we know. We're not quite sure yet, but I think we know. In my own case, in my own personal case, I was lucky enough to finish third, I guess I could say, which in a four-man race, which wasn't good enough to matter, except psychologically. But the fact of the matter is, somewhere in the area, in the neighborhood of 5,900 people voted for me. There was about 1,000 too few, but be that as it may, 5,900 people willing to put their check mark beside your name is pretty nice and pretty flattering and humbling, and I appreciate it. And I've had a lot of people congratulate me and suggest that I run again. And at this point, I don't think I'm going to run again. I don't have any intent to, but we'll see what happens. I don't know how I'm going to feel or how my health is going to be in a couple of years, or I don't think any of us know that. So, but anyway, right now I'm still recovering from the past one, and it's really interesting because I went around on last Wednesday, and if you remember, we didn't do a program last Wednesday because I had pretty much committed to drive throughout the district and pick up my campaign signs on Wednesday because the local officials wanted them up as quickly as possible. And I figured the faster I did that, the easier it would be, especially when I had the results and I knew that I hadn't won. I think probably would be much easier picking up signs if you had won than it is when you don't. But be that as it may, I did that on Wednesday, and I have a bunch of signs. And we have our recycle pickup tomorrow. So I checked on Sunday and sent a Facebook message to a good friend of mine who works for the recycling and the waste authority here in our county, and asked her about recycling campaign signs. And it turns out it was a good question because there were two kinds of signs. One of them is some of them are cardboard, but some of them are coated in plastic. And the ones that are coated in plastic, the recycle folks don't want. So I had to separate those, and I've been doing that. So I'm all ready to go. So once the signs go, I think it'll be psychologically over for me. But it's really interesting. Last night, as I was doing this, my wife asked me and said, "Now, before you get rid of all of those signs, you're not going to run again, are you?" And I told her right now, honestly, I don't have any intent to do that. But so the signs are gone. So obviously, if I did have a change of heart in a couple of years and decide to give it another try, I'd have to start from scratch with new signs and new cards and all the rest of it. But that's okay. Welcome to the Virtual Center. I think we've got a lot of catch up and pick up to do. A lot of prognostication. I think everybody is making all sorts of some of them educated guesses, some of them not so educated, about what's going to happen and what a Trump presidency is going to be like, and on and on and on. And many of the people who have been most opposed to President Obama suddenly like him because of the cordial way that he greeted President-elect Trump. And so I think, I think there's a lot going on and a lot of speculation, a lot we don't know, a lot we can only guess at. And I think for purposes of discussion, it's a very, very interesting and challenging time. That's kind of why we're here. And I hope that we can contribute to make the most of what we hope will be an opportunity and a positive experience. And again, the big issue is recovering from the election, and I like everybody else have been privy to the demonstrations all over the country and the chants of "he's not my president" and all of this, and I understand, I know how difficult it is for some people to accept the results of the election. That's always true. I think we have to appreciate that. But at the same time, I think all of us must recognize at some point that we do need to go on, and that we have to believe to a certain point that even though we talk so long about how dire the results might be, the fact of the matter is we have to hope that that things don't quite work out the way we predicted they might. So with that, let me encourage you to participate in our program. I would love to hear from you. And our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, should you elect to communicate with me via email, is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906@gmail.com. And again, I do remind you of our Facebook page. I did put a few things on Facebook the other day. I haven't in the last 24 hours, but I did put a couple of links on Facebook over the weekend. And I do encourage you to take a look at our Facebook page. If you are a user of Facebook, you know exactly how to do that. Just go to the home page, and in the search box at the top, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will have access to our Facebook page. There's one thing that occurred that I spent a little bit of time this morning thinking about this. At first, I didn't think it was worth mentioning. But the fact of the matter is, it is worth mentioning, and for one reason that it's worth mentioning is because nobody else is mentioning it. What I'm talking about, of course, is the 60 Minutes interview that Lesley Stahl conducted Sunday night with President-elect Donald Trump and his family. I watched a good portion of that interview, of that hour, and like everybody else, I was kind of enthralled by it. I was very, very encouraged by the very positive comments that Donald Trump made about President Obama, about the transition, about the extent, about the First Lady, and how Melania Trump reacted to her and how positive that was. And I think ever since then, the comments about President Obama's reaction after the election have been very positive from people that you wouldn't expect that. I'm thinking of Kellyanne Conway, for example. I saw her this morning. She was talking about, I watched a little bit of her interview on Fox this morning. And she also was very, very complimentary of the president. And, of course, he made the point that he wants to do everything he can do, because if the transition is smooth, so also we all win. And so, that's kind of, I think what I think a lot of people are grabbing onto and holding onto and hoping that it's true. Then, on the other hand, you get the president-elect's commitment to Stephen Bannon and all the negative flap that's causing, not only from Democrats, but from members of the Republican Party as well. Stephen Bannon has been a problem for mainstream Republicans for a long time. So it's the messages are mixed at this point, I think. But my point is that there was one comment that Donald Trump made in that interview with Lesley Stahl that I kept waiting for members of the media to pick up on afterwards, and none of them have. I've seen more videotape on that particular interview. It's an interview that all the networks have been tapping into. It's the first one after the election. It was an extended interview. It was I think it was a very substantive interview in a lot of ways. I think Lesley Stahl asked all the right questions. And so on NBC, on Fox, on CNN, I've seen a lot of people with excerpts from that interview. But nobody is focusing on the comment that he made that I think might be the most pertinent about his impending administration of all the others. And that's the issue of Twitter, the issue of social media. Donald Trump made the comment to Lesley Stahl when she asked him if he was going to keep tweeting that that's the way he communicates with the American people, and that he has tens of millions of people on his Twitter account, and that means that he has immediate access to a huge proportion of the people in this nation, and of course around the world as well. What that means is that the old idea of the bully pulpit that Theodore Roosevelt used to talk about a century ago, about the role or the advantage of the president in being able to speak directly to the American people, that advantage, which Theodore Roosevelt recognized, which FDR recognized with the fireside chats, which Ronald Reagan recognized, which John F. Kennedy recognized because of his ability to manage the press conferences, his ability to communicate directly with the American people. Donald Trump has embraced social media. He has embraced a mechanism, a technology, which gives him immediate access to a huge proportion of the American electorate. That means that he really doesn't have to manipulate all his thoughts, all his ideas, all his policies, all his programs, all his concerns through the Washington establishment in order to get the message out there to the American people that he wants. Literally, he can communicate in an instant to millions of people. That means that he has at his disposal a power that no president has ever had before. It could be positive. It could be negative. It could be very negative. Because he has the ability to bring the pressure of public opinion directly on members of Congress, directly on members of the Supreme Court, directly on those who fill the various administrative offices in government. Literally, Donald Trump has the opportunity to call in allies from the American electorate in an instant in order to support or to oppose a particular policy or a particular action that he doesn't like. That, I would suggest to you, is an incredible power for good or ill. It's a power that dictators have always imagined and have always worked toward getting. But it's a power that can also be used for good. But the point is, it's power. Raw power. Donald Trump commented to Lesley Stahl that he believes that social media is the reason he was elected. He said that straight up. Of course I'm going to keep using Twitter, utilizing Twitter. It's the reason it got me elected, he said. It gave him the opportunity to access and to cultivate and nourish a constituency which became huge, so that when the rallies were scheduled and the crowds came out in huge numbers with barely any notice, it was because of social media. We have seen throughout the Middle East in the last couple of years riots in the streets. Governments are being overthrown through the use of cell phones. The power and the potential influence of technology is clearly recognized by President-elect Donald Trump, and he has committed to use it. That, to me, probably is the most significant thing that he said in that 1 hour long interview with Lesley Stahl. I can't believe that none of the Wolf Blitzers or Chris Matthews or Chris Hayes or Rachel Maddows or any of the others picked up on that, because it's huge. And going back to the founders, it's a power and a reality that Madison and Hamilton in the Federalist Papers never anticipated, never accepted or expected to be available or even possible. Madison's entire approach to the Constitution of the United States, when Madison drafted the Virginia Plan, which was pretty much the outline of the Constitution of the United States, he did it in the context of 13 rural states spread up and down from one end of the Atlantic coast to the other, where communication was difficult, where there was no national media. There was local media, regional media, statewide media, but not national media. So there was no way for the people of New England to really know in a short period of time what was happening in the South, what was happening in the rural South, what people were thinking, or anything else. So therefore, it was very difficult, if not impossible, to organize anything on a national scale. That was with 13 colonies, not 50 states. But what we have now is technology that makes the instantaneous organization of this nation possible around issues, programs, policies, ideological stances, whatever you want to call it. And the person who has that and the person who can use it, imagine as a citizen of the United States that you are on Donald Trump's Twitter account. That means you are getting instantaneous messages from the President of the United States. Think about what that means in terms of the past history of this nation. Think about what it means in terms of the potential power of the person who manages that Twitter account. This is uncharted territory. We don't know the full extent of what's possible. What we do know is that we have a president-elect, a president in waiting, who is fully aware of what the significance and possible potential of that power might be. And he can't wait to exercise it. I think in terms of the checks and balances and separation of powers within our federal government, all of the things that were used in order to control and slow down the process are now gone. Well, they're not gone, but they're potentially on hold, because the power of instantaneous communication with the American people gives the President of the United States the potential, the possibility, to instantaneously bring public opinion to Washington on an issue in a moment's notice. We've never had this before. The potential may have been there, but we really have never had anybody in office before who was fully aware of what this might mean and fully determined to use it. Now we have. It seems to me, and I didn't want to spend nearly as much time on this as I've taken. I intended it to be just an opening comment. But the fact of the matter is, it seems to me to call down the road for serious reflection. I really believe that the key elements that have made this republic work or enabled this republic to work in the past are in jeopardy of becoming non-functional. I really believe that the system of checks and balances and separation of powers that the founders put in place has pretty much been neutered. And I think when you look at what the founders were afraid of in terms of popular government, in terms of a republic, many of the things that the founders most feared and structured the Constitution to deal with are coming to the fore as a result of social media. I really believe that we haven't even begun to appreciate the challenges. The challenge that all of us have to find a way to come up with policies and programs that will make it possible to control this. Because the fact of the matter is, we have, and you could tell by the negativism and the vitriol in this past campaign, there are a lot of people in this society, unfortunately, who really need to be watched and whose behavior and activities do need to be monitored. And the measures, the methods that have traditionally worked to monitor these kinds of things have been rendered pretty much inoperative. And I think all of us have to be aware of it, and we have to come up with an alternative. The fact of the matter is, and I almost hate to say this because it sounds like a contradiction in terms for me, because I am very opposed to the idea of a constitutional convention for reasons that we've already talked about. But the fact of the matter is, there are changes which have taken place in this nation which make something like a constitutional convention appropriate. The only problem is that the people who you bring to such a convention need to come with the right attitude, not with an attitude of using the opportunity to destroy what's left of the republic. And I'm afraid that's what we might be dealing with. Anyway, I did want to share this point because Donald Trump made that comment to Lesley Stahl. He made it very clear. It was not at all, he didn't equivocate one bit. He made it very clear that he was fully aware of the potential of social media. He said straight up that he believes it got him elected. He has acknowledged that he would continue to use it. And if you follow the media each day, he indeed is doing that. And so he is maintaining direct contact with millions of people who are linked into his Twitter account. I think you have to think about what that means in terms of the power that is potentially in his hands. I also think you have to think about it from the perspective of those citizens on that Twitter account. Because that means that these people are going to be receiving direct communiques on a regular basis from the President of the United States. That basically means that millions of people who never before even had the remotest possibility of establishing direct contact with the President of the United States now potentially have it on a regular basis. We don't know what the potential on that end might be. We know what the potential might be from Donald Trump's side. But in terms of the people's ability to speak directly to the president, all of us have heard through the years about comments about being invited to the White House, about people honored to be granted an audience with the Pope. This kind of communication, this kind of opportunity has been rare. Social media makes it routine. And I think all of us need to take that for the full measure of what it's worth, because I think it might be worth more than we even know. Anyway, with that, I think I'd like to get in a little bit further on the election. I didn't request permission to do this, but to be honest with you, I don't think there's a problem. A good friend of mine, a former colleague of mine, political scientist, named Jim White, who has been teaching political science at Concord University for a number of years. Jim has long done research on elections, on election results, on voting behavior and those kinds of things. And he's been especially involved here in West Virginia by doing post-election analyses over the last several election cycles in order to try to get a handle on what exactly is going on with the West Virginia electorate. And most particularly, I think more than anything else, the idea or the motivation that really has prompted Jim to do this. And he and I used to, when I was working every day with him, We used to talk about this frequently. And it was the wonder that we both used to have about the degree to which West Virginians seem to vote against their own best interests. This election is no different. It's very obvious that the way the results turned out suggests that there's a disconnect between what the people voted for and what the recipients of those votes are committed to do. Very honestly, working people, to an extent at least, voted to support those who defeated prevailing wage, who implemented right to work, who did a number of other things, whose commitment is to shrink the size of government, reduce programs, reduce entitlements. That in a state where only 48% of the working age population are working. 52% of the working age population in West Virginia are recipients of some sort of check, some sort of public assistance, because they don't have a regular income. One would think that they would vote in a way which is consistent with that reality in their lives. But the fact of the matter is they didn't. And the fact of the matter is they haven't voted in a way that's consistent with their own needs and wants for several election cycles. And that has led Jim to do his research, his voter analyses. Anyway, a couple of days after the election, Jim wrote an article entitled Partisan Elegy, in which he took some of the most telling statistics about what happened in America on Election Day and put it together in an article and has submitted it to the Charleston Gazette. When he submitted it, he forwarded a copy to me. Since it is in the hopper for publication in the Gazette, I don't think there are any limitations on sharing some of his thoughts, some of his ideas with folks here at the Virtual Center, because it's out there for public consumption. But what I find in reading this piece, and it's not that long, is that Jim has really put his finger on a number of issues and realities that I think all of us need to understand. The obituaries, the election postmortems, as it were, are coming from all directions. But Jim makes the point, and I think he's right, that there are a number of what he thinks are very important statistics about voter behavior last Tuesday that haven't as yet become that public, that the media has yet to tie into. And he kind of makes clear what a few of those are. I think it's a pretty insightful piece. And when I read it, when Jim was kind enough to send it to me last Thursday or Friday, I made up my mind that I would share it here at the Virtual Center with our folks, with the participants listening, because I think there's quite a bit of information, quite a bit of food for thought here. I intended to get into this yesterday, but as you know, we didn't do a live program yesterday, and that was totally my fault. I was just not feeling that well yesterday. I think I had one of those 24-hour bugs or something. I didn't feel very well all Sunday night, and woke up Monday morning, didn't feel any better. So I felt like I had to bail out of doing a live program yesterday, because I just couldn't seem to get my bearings for some reason, and I feel quite a bit better today. So anyway, let me share some of Jim's thoughts with you, and I don't want to I'm not going to take them out of context, and I'm not going to do any wild interpretation of what he's done, because I think what he's done is telling. But let me share it with you, and then maybe we can kind of do a little bit of speculation on some of the things that he said. Jim says, his opening comment, Republican electoral successes, a large electoral college victory, while maintaining control of both houses of Congress, shocked many. A complete look at the data, Jim says, suggests that the real story of the election is the continued slow death of our two major parties. Jim believes that both major parties have taken a hit this past Tuesday. I don't believe for a second that we here at the Virtual Center should be shocked by that comment, because I think we've seen that coming for some time. You'll remember that up until a couple of weeks before the election, up until the Comey letter, 11 days before the election, on Hillary Clinton's emails, speculation was ripe everywhere that this election could probably destroy the Republican Party as we knew it. That the Republican Party we've come to know would never be the same again after this election. And then things took a turn in the Republicans' favor with the Comey release of the letter 11 days before the election. According to the New York Times yesterday, even Hillary Clinton is acknowledging that the impact of that letter on the election has yet to be documented, but is real. It shifted momentum from one direction to the other direction. It came out at a time when the polls were showing that Donald Trump's support and the gap between him and Hillary was getting wider and wider, with Hillary at the top. And that letter reversed that process. And suddenly the gap began to close in many of these key states. I don't think there's any way in the world that any of us can deny that. Jim goes on. The Trump victory in particular has broadly been interpreted as produced by white working class voters without post-secondary degrees, a disenfranchised silent majority frustrated with elite indifference and condescension that voted to shake up the American political system. This is the standard interpretation. Jim's right. This is what most people are saying. This is the Trump constituency. White, working class voters without post-secondary degrees. A disenfranchised silent majority that's frustrated with indifference and condescension from elites. And this group is the group that spoke last Tuesday. Jim makes the point, however, this explanation fails to incorporate all the relevant electoral facts, most notably turnout and incumbency advantage. What's coming are, I believe, two pieces of information that are incredibly important. But so far, Jim's right. People aren't talking about this. Turnout. Turnout increased in West Virginia. It remained, however, below the national average, and participation nationwide, it declined from 2012. Let me say this again. While West Virginia turnout in this last Tuesday's election was up, the fact of the matter is turnout nationally was down from 2012. and I think you have to kind of listen to this stuff carefully. As a percentage of the American voting age population, turnout nationwide was lower than all but 4 presidential elections since 1924. Think about this. Despite the millions and millions and millions of dollars in advertising, in video advertising, in infomercials, in negative ads, despite all of that, as a percentage of the American voting age population, turnout last Tuesday was lower than in all but 4 presidential elections since 1924. That means that there were only 4 presidential elections in the last 85 years that had a lower turnout than this one. Think about that. 4 elections in the last 85 years with a lower turnout than this one. When all the votes are counted, Jim says, Trump's total will trail not only Hillary's, but Romney's in 2012. When all the votes are tallied, Trump's total vote is going to be less than Romney got in 2012. That means that Trump's Electoral College victory can generally be attributed not to white working class voters who were newly mobilized from either abstention or from the Democratic Party, but rather the fact that Clinton got only 90% of the votes that Obama received in 2012. Hillary got 10% less turnout than Obama got in 2012. It cost him the election. Trump got less than Romney got, yet he won the election overwhelmingly in the Electoral College. Between them, Hillary and Trump will get nearly 7 million fewer votes than Obama and Romney collectively received in 2012. About half of those missing votes can be attributed to total abstention, and the rest went to Johnson, Stein, McMullen, and others. One of the others that we were talking about at the Rotary meeting I attended before we went on the air today is for the dead gorilla in Cincinnati who jumped into the pit at the Cincinnati Zoo this past spring with the little boy, if you remember, and they felt the need to euthanize, to kill the gorilla in order to save the child. Word is, and I say word is because there's no validation for this, it's just rumors so far, that as many as 15,000 votes for president went to this gorilla, as well as write-ins for everything else. Ric Flair, the professional wrestler, for example, got votes for president. So the fact of the matter is, Hillary and Romney together, Hillary and Trump together, got 7 million fewer votes than Obama and Romney got in 2012. Voter attachment to parties has been undermined by the mass media and interest groups. These alternate linkage institutions prefer conflict, spectacle, and single-class stridency to collaboration and compromise, producing campaigns that are as expensive and as negative as they are vapid. That's a quote from Jim White, the author. Jim believes that the less votes, the fewer votes that Hillary and Trump got, despite the publicity, despite the interest in the election, suggests that the two parties are in trouble. They aren't able to get out the vote. Fact is, the Republican Party, as we know, has long not wanted to get out the vote and has been, according to reports, the Republican Party in some states has been guilty of some efforts to suppress voting in a number of areas. The fact of the matter is, Hillary knew. Bernie Sanders knew. Bernie Sanders, throughout his campaign and afterwards, when he was speaking on behalf of Hillary Clinton, continued to make the point that turnout was the key. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. So what we have is yet another example of a Trump victory happening not because of the people he turned out, but because of the people that Hillary was unable to turn out. And as we know, President Obama made a number of speeches throughout the country before the election in which he encouraged people to vote, vote, vote. They did not. And I think this is something that all of us need to be fully cognizant of. In the process of pacing around, I laid my copy of the document down. Here it is. I couldn't find where I laid it, so I got it back. I'm sorry. So anyway, those two things, I think, are particularly significant in Jim White's initial research after the election. Of course, this begs the kind of detailed analysis of the vote by district and county and precinct and all the rest of it that will happen in coming weeks and months. But this is significant. Jim says, many scholars lament the decline of parties, which serve important functions in a democracy, organizing support for an opposition to policy proposals, facilitating action in a federal system of separate branches, sharing power that was designed to impede such action, mobilizing mass participation, and taking responsibility for successes, failures, and compromises with the opposing party, even if taking responsibility entails incumbents losing elections. So Jim's point, I think, is very well taken, that what we've seen is that the ability of the parties to do what they were organized to do in terms of mass mobilization of the electorate continues to decline. And that is having a direct impact on who wins and who loses. I think a number of candidates, a number of political campaigns have been built on the reality of a declining voter pool, a declining electorate. To go out there and try to stir up. And again, I'm thinking of 08 and especially 08, with President Obama, when there was so much hope, so much optimism behind the turnout and the vote for President Obama. That was the kind of turnout that Hillary was going to have to match. Couldn't do it. Don't think she could ever do it. The Democratic Party couldn't do it. We couldn't do it here in West Virginia, except that West Virginia had a higher turnout. I think that the constituency that supported Donald Trump throughout the campaign did come out here in West Virginia. But I don't think the Democrats were able to bring out the consistency or the vote that they hoped for. I don't believe that. So in a sense, one of the realities that Jim White feels the election validated was the continued decline of political parties in the nation. And then Jim goes into this a little bit further. So let me kind of move through this, because I apologize for the phone ringing in the background. I won't answer it. I have no idea who it is. But the decline of parties, Jim says, the decline of political parties has been forecast for a long time. A quarter century ago, the authors of Politics by Other Means associated with parties the acronym RIP, Revelation, Investigation, Prosecution, activities driven by interest group funding and media sensationalism. In other words, Jim White points out that a quarter century ago, Politics by Other Means talked about the decline of parties and the fact that parties were increasingly being associated with investigations and prosecutions, and parties tended to leave a bad taste in the mouth of many Americans. A bit more recently, Jim says, Thomas Frank's What's the Matter with Kansas, Stanley Greenberg's The Two Americas, predicted the movement of white working class voters to the Republican Party, and we've seen that happen. It looks like, Jim White says, these class-based models of voting have been realized, and that demography now supersedes partisanship as the primary determinant of presidential voting behavior, at least here in West Virginia. Let me comment on that line, because I think that is particularly significant. What Jim White is saying is that more and more our elections have become less partisan, less struggles between Democrats and Republicans, and more driven by demographics, by class, by self-interest. While our partisan voter registration continues to favor the Democrats, Jim says, electoral loyalty to the Democratic candidate did not survive the Obama or Clinton campaigns, and it's doubtful that habits discarded over 3 presidential election cycles will reappear in 2020. In other words, Jim is saying that it's pretty obvious that this decline in partisanship is going to continue, at least here in West Virginia. Throughout the campaign that I was in, I was hearing people telling me that I really didn't have a good idea, a clear idea, as to how much West Virginians hated Democrats. Well, the fact of the matter is, it appears that that was correct. I was even told to not put Democrat on my signs, that the less prominent linking my campaign to Democrats was the better chance I had to win. I refused to accept that. I basically suggested or campaigned on the idea of reinvigorating the Democratic Party. Obviously, it didn't work. Jim goes on. This is his last paragraph. A replacement of partisanship with demography might lead to more intense and competitive presidential campaigns, but it probably doesn't bode well for our democracy and our ability actually to solve problems like low wages, crumbling infrastructure, educational underachievement, addiction, and debt. Although progress was often slow, America was more successful at solving these problems when our parties were stronger. Feckless governance has been the price of our corresponding collective civic disengagement. Basically, what Jim is saying is that people's tendency to become less and less joiners, less and less members of political parties, of civic groups, and all the rest of it, are being reflected in our electoral system. And the fact of the matter is, people's inclination to not join, to not be connected with community groups or statewide political groups is extremely strong. We see it in the decline in church membership. We see it in the decline of certain activities, certain team activities. People want to be alone, want to be isolated. They want to exercise alone. They don't want to become part of organized group sports or group athletics. They want to be independent. They want to be able to do it alone in their own homes or at 4 in the morning when there's nobody else there. This is a tendency which is working contrary to the needs of political parties. Jim believes that it's just going to contribute to the further weakening of the party's ability to mobilize the electorate and get out the vote. I think that this ties in, that this relates pretty much to the issue that we opened the program with today, which is Donald Trump's commitment to social media. What this means is that Donald Trump, as President of the United States, is going to be just that. He's not envisioning himself as the Republican President of the United States. He's looking at himself as Donald Trump, the president. It's going to be up to the Republican Party to find ways to take advantage of that. The reality seems to be that they need him more than he needs them. They need him in order to be able to pull off, to secure the benefits of the Republican victory. He doesn't need them to get elected. He proved that. He proved that he didn't need the Speaker of the House or the other leadership in the Republican Party to get elected. As his campaign managers, he took Stephen Bannon and Kellyanne Conway, neither of them affiliated with one of the traditional Republican Party or the Democratic Party. He ran a campaign as an independent, not as the head of a party. Here in West Virginia, Jim Justice was elected Democratic governor of West Virginia. Jim Justice was a Republican up until a year ago. He didn't change his position on issues. He just changed parties. What that means is the meaning of party is changing, continues to change. I think Jim is onto something. I think he's right. The two major findings, it seems to me, of Jim's research is that the turnout at elections continues to go down, and the ability of parties to implement or to affect that turnout continues to go down as well. That the Republicans won does not mean that they were successful in getting out the vote. Donald Trump was successful in getting out the vote. But as Jim White points out, the fact that Trump got fewer votes than did Romney in 2012 suggests that the media was correct, that the constituency of white working class underemployed Americans was not sufficient to elect him president, was somewhat correct. The only way that it could elect him president was if the turnout continued to decline. And it did. It did. So the fact of the matter is, I think the message is pretty clear. If the parties are going to remain viable, substantive, and meaningful, they're going to have to find ways to reconnect to the American people, to reconnect to the priorities and the interests and the needs of the American people. Parties, once again, are going to have to represent the best interests of their members, not themselves, not their leadership. Traditionally, what the Democratic Party did in this election on the national level was to dismiss the needs of the people that it needed in order to be successful. Bernie Sanders was speaking for those people. Bernie Sanders was putting out positions on policies and issues that were directly pertinent to the needs and interests of those people. And the party establishment administratively blew off Bernie Sanders, blew off the constituents. We'll take their votes, but we will continue to decide what the party stands for and what it doesn't. And it didn't work. So I think here on this Tuesday, 1 week after the election, I think already we've got a fairly good handle on some pretty significant things, I think, about the election and about what happened. I hope so. I want to, when I got this email from Jim with this attachment, I thanked him for it. I told him I probably would share it with the listening audience here at the Virtual Center. And we did that. I hope that I did him justice, because I think he did a great job. The fact that this article was put together 48 hours after the election, I think is pretty pertinent, pretty sound stuff. So thank you, Jim. We've just turned the bottom of the hour. It's 34 minutes after the hour. So we've got about 24, 25 minutes left in our program. Not enough time to fully deal with the other issue that I think we need to deal with today. But it's a tremendous lead into tomorrow, because I think this is going to be tomorrow's issue. And I really believe it's a significant one. It's that old bugaboo, the Electoral College. I can't imagine that anybody out there has missed the emphasis on the Electoral College that has accompanied this particular election. Because once again, as in 2000, as in the Bush-Gore election in 2000, the candidate who is winning the popular vote is not winning the election. Once again, the candidate that is winning electoral votes is not winning the popular vote. As of today, with votes still counting, still being counted, it appears that Hillary Clinton is approaching 1 million votes more than Donald Trump received. Last I saw was 700 and some thousand. In the year 2000, Al Gore received 740,000 more votes than did George Bush. And as you know, that particular election was decided by the Supreme Court. I don't think there's any basis for challenge of the results in this particular election. Donald Trump, it appears, secured 290 electoral votes. At least at this point, that's what he's got. He needed only 270. So the election is not in dispute. But the Electoral College itself is in dispute. People are arguing with some heat that maybe it's time to trash the Electoral College once and for all because it's become outdated. For the most part, those who have opposed that, those who have continued to defend the Electoral College, have done so mainly because they argue to eliminate the Electoral College would contradict the wisdom of the founders. The founders, many people believe, knew full well what the Electoral College could accomplish. And that we would be doing serious damage to the political fabric in this country if we abolish it. Many, many people have argued for a long time that the Electoral College is outdated. The conditions which most worried the founders no longer exist. The threats and the challenges which the Electoral College was designed to attack or to address no longer exist. The Electoral College, many argue, is an outdated remnant of the 18th century. The conditions that made it appropriate then no longer exist. And that the Electoral College is something that we ought not to have. And the rationale is the candidate who's receiving the majority of the votes is not winning. Therefore, the Electoral College and the popular vote are not in sync. And that this is going eventually to backfire on the American people. The American people are not going to put up with this, is the argument. I've been doing quite a bit of research in the last several days on the Electoral College. And let me begin by suggesting to you where it comes from. A good friend of mine, we had breakfast together this past Saturday. And the first question that my friend had at breakfast related to the Electoral College. And he said, in no uncertain terms, Bill, do you think we still need the Electoral College? It obviously is a joke. It's electing presidents in violation of the will of the people. We have the ability to count the votes. The people are telling us they want one candidate. The Electoral College is telling us that we're going to get the other candidate. We can't continue to have that. Something's wrong. And I basically said, well, I mean, the debate over the Electoral College has been going on for a long time. And it really speaks to the concerns that the founders had at the time of the Constitution. The things that they were most worried about, they felt the Electoral College could address. Kind of. Sort of. But they weren't really sure. Let me say one thing right here at the outset about the Electoral College. The idea that the founders conceived the Electoral College to address particular problems is not quite true. The fact of the matter is, the Electoral College is probably the least definitive element or aspect in the Constitution of the United States. Most of the founders, most of the members of the Constitutional Convention thought that the Electoral College might address the problems that they were most concerned about, but they really weren't sure. Translation: those people who argue that we should keep the Electoral College because to abandon it would violate the intent of the founders are wrong. When it comes to the Electoral College, there's no clear intent on the part of the founders at all. They didn't know what they wanted. All they knew is what they didn't want. And the Electoral College was kind of a patched together substitute that many people believed would address the concerns they were most worried about. But to be very honest, they weren't really sure that the Electoral College was the way to go. They were much more focused on the problems that the Electoral College was designed to address than they were on the ability of the Electoral College to address them. In a sense, there wasn't all that much opposition to the Electoral College because, to be very honest with you, I believe that many of the delegates weren't sure how it worked. I'm not sure that they were sure what the Electoral College really did. It's the most confusing, vague, complex aspect of the Constitution. It's the most difficult to understand. The one thing we can say about the Constitution of the United States is that it's carefully crafted. Every word and phrase in it has substance, has meaning. There's an intent behind it. There's a reason for it to be there. The Electoral College doesn't fit that model, doesn't fit that definition. It's the most confusing aspect of the Constitution. If I may, I'd like to share it with you. The Electoral College is addressed in Article 2 of the Constitution. Article 1, we know, deals with Congress. It's the longest article because the founders anticipated, the founders believed that the legislative branch of government, Congress, the relations between the House of Representatives and the Senate, would be the most important part of the government under the new Constitution. It was envisioned to be the most important, therefore the article that addressed it was the longest in the Constitution. Article 2 came second. It dealt with the president, the executive. It's much shorter than Article 1. But I would suggest it's not nearly as clear as what you find in Article 1. Article 3, of course, deals with the judicial branch, the Supreme Court. It's the shortest of all. And partly reason for that is because most people didn't anticipate the Supreme Court playing a significant role in the new Constitution at all. But let's look at Article 2. In terms of election of the president, the method for choosing the President of the United States. This is directly out of the Constitution, Section 1 of Article 2. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. No senator, no representative, no person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. Let's look at that paragraph. Each state will choose in a manner that its legislature may direct the number of electors, and that number shall equal the total of senators and representatives of that state. West Virginia has 3 congressional districts. That means we elect 3 members to Congress. And like all the other 50 states, we have 2 senators. That means that West Virginia has 5 electoral votes. So when the votes are cast for president in the Electoral College, West Virginia will have 5 of those votes. No senator, representative, or person holding a position of trust or profit of the under the United States shall be an elector. What that means is the electors will not be known politicians. They won't be political leaders. At least they won't be office holders. The idea is that the electors would be a special group of people elected or chosen to do only one thing, which is to elect the best person for president. And then they're done. They go back into the woodwork, so to speak. They go back to their homes, their businesses, their jobs, and they cease to exist as people. So that's the first thing. The number of electors and the fact that they are not to be politicians. They are not to come in to the process of electing the president with prejudice or with a bias. The thinking is that they will be independent citizens with no political agenda, whose job only is to cast a vote for president. The electors, I'm back to the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for two persons, of whom at least one shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. This is important. Each elector casts two votes, both of them for president. Not one for president and one for vice president. Both of them for president. The reason for that is that if there was only one of the two going for president, these electors would most likely pick somebody from that state, from their own state, the favorite son. But this particular article, section, says that no more than one, only one of the two candidates they vote for president can be from their own state. That means they are casting their ballot for a potential president from a state other than their own. If they had the option of making one president and the other vice president, obviously their president would be the local guy and the vice president would be the out-of-stater. But that's eliminated by telling them that both of their votes had to be for president. They shall make a list, the electors shall make a list of all persons voted for and the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of government of the United States directed to the President of the Senate. Each state will sign and seal its electoral votes. The person that got the most votes, the person that got the second most votes, etc., and send them to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, shall open all the certificates, and votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes will be president, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. And if there be more than one who have such majority, and have an equal number of votes, then the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for president. And if no person has a majority, then from the five highest on the list, the House shall choose the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having one vote. So if it goes into the House, each of the 50 states only has one vote. It has 5 electors, West Virginia. But the state itself only gets one vote if it goes into the House of Representatives. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary for a choice. In every case, after the choice for president, the person having the greatest number of votes of electors shall be the vice president. If 2 or more have equal votes there, then the Senate shall choose the vice president. Just think about how complicated that procedure is. All of it is designed to counter a perceived problem. The only way to understand it is to go back to the founders and find out exactly what the major concerns were about the different ways of electing the president. And that's the way I think that we need to address this particular issue. It's that complicated. So the fact of the matter is, it's really hard to pinpoint the intent of the founders when it comes to the Electoral College, because there really wasn't an intent. All there was a documented list of concerns or fears that needed to be addressed. And one by one, they addressed them. The result was this particular section of the Constitution of the United States is one of the most confusing sections in the whole document, because the purpose for it is not positive, but it's negative. It's kind of like the turnout in the election, the article that Jim White just wrote us about some of the data from last Tuesday's election. It was absolutely, without a doubt, one of the most negative political campaigns we've ever had. By definition, negative campaigns reduce the size of the turnout. Negative campaigns turn off voters. They cause voters to not go out, or to vote for third candidates, or dead gorillas, if you will. So it stands to reason that as our campaigns become more and more negative, turnout is going to become lower and lower and lower. Hillary needed a large turnout. She didn't get it. Donald Trump needed a large turnout. He didn't get it either. He got fewer votes than Romney got. So the fact of the matter is, Jim White's point is well taken. What the election data tells us is that America's two-party system is in trouble, because the whole approach to the election was negative. The similarity here is that the founders' approach to the Electoral College was negative as well. They didn't have an intent. They didn't have something they wanted. Instead, they had a whole roster of things they didn't want. And they pasted together a hodgepodge section of the Constitution to address each of those concerns. The result was that it's the most confounding, confusing, complex section of the Constitution of the United States. And that's really what we've got to deal with. I do believe, however, that our time is up. We're at 59 minutes after the hour. I can't believe that we've finished an hour and a half already. It seems like we just started. But that's for me. I hope you feel the same way. I invite you to be back with us tomorrow. We'll be here at our regular time. Here in the East, that'll be 1 o'clock p.m., 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Eastern Standard Time. For Bob Kincaid, Agnes, and the folks at Head On, thank you so very, very much for listening and for your continued support of the network and the Virtual Center. I hope you have a wonderful evening, a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll be back together again tomorrow. Thank you.